Late today I recorded this debate on the Labor and Coalition policy differences with Climate Change Minister Penny Wong in Adelaide and Shadow Minister Greg Hunt in Melbourne. Penny Wong, after nearly 3 years in government, apart from postponing an emissions trading scheme, which we'll address shortly, what actions have you taken that you can genuinely claim have cut or are cutting greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, central to what we've done this term has been the renewable energy target, Kerry, which will increase by 4 times the amount of renewable energy we use here in Australia. That will deliver around 39 million tonnes of abatement, the equivalent of taking about 10 million cars off the road. In addition, we put 100,000 solar panels on Australian roofs. That's almost 10 times what the previous government did, when of course we know renewables went backwards. We put 170,000 solar hot water systems into Australian homes. In addition, we're investing very substantially in renewables, in research and technology through the Clean Energy Initiative. So this is an unprecedented amount of investment in renewable energy under this government.
Now, is that the full extent in terms of your existing policies or policies that you have committed to for the next term that will clearly cut emissions?
In addition to what we've already achieved, Kerry, we've laid out in this election a range of policies which are around 3 principles. Preparing for the limit on pollution through a price on carbon, investment in clean energy and reducing pollution in our daily lives. Obviously, in terms of the first, we've said we want a price on carbon, a limit on pollution, and we've laid out a pathway to that. In terms of the investment in clean energy, we've said we will not allow dirty, highly polluting power stations to be built. We'll have standards for those stations, giving clear certainty to the energy sector. We're also going to put $1 billion into connecting renewables to the grid, so making sure we can harness the energy of the sun, of the wind, of wave, geothermal, but more, as importantly, bring it to Australian homes. And finally, we've outlined a number of policies, including policies to change the mix of the car fleet so we can reduce emissions there, and tax breaks for building owners so we can have more energy efficient buildings as we go forward. But of course, Kerry, these are all important, but fundamentally what we need is not just policies for 1 or 2 years. We need to move the Australian economy from an economy that relies on polluting a lot, polluting without limit, to a low pollution economy. And the only leader who's looking to that challenge is Julia Gillard.
Greg Hunt, we'll come to your policies in a moment, but first, can you give us your critique of Penny Wong's claims?
The government has been characterised over the last term by incompetency in the delivery of its programs. And I say that when you look at the Pink Bats program, the Green Loans program, the collapse of the Solar Homes program. Take, for example, the Pink Bats or home insulation program. What we've seen there is almost 200 house fires. We've seen 1,500 potentially deadly electrified roofs, 240,000 homes with either dangerous or dodgy insulation, and of course 4 terrible, terrible tragedies. That is the most significant of the failures. It was a program designed to reduce emissions. It is unlikely to achieve 25% of what was promised. There's $1 billion which has been budgeted to fix it up. That's an example of sheer fundamental incompetency, which sadly we're seeing again with the Cash for Clunkers program and now the Citizens' Assembly. The second critique, the very simple point, is their proposal for the future is to put in place a citizens' lottery to determine whether or not we will have a particular climate policy, but the intention is to impose a 20% increase on electricity prices for mums and dads. That's the principal vehicle for the future. We reject that. We want a direct action approach which will clean up power stations, which will clean up waste coal mine gas, which will help replenish our soils and our vegetation. Direct, real things along with a set of initiatives which we'll put out in a minute, but direct action versus electricity pricing and competence versus Pink Bats.
But the question is, will your real action cut carbon emissions by 5% by 2020?
Yes. Clearly, categorically, absolutely.
Provably?
Absolutely. The way we will do that is very simple. What is direct action? Direct action was defined this week by Premier Brumby. He adopted the model, the nature, the form, the structure of the Coalition's approach, which was to put in place a fund, although he announced no money, to put in place a fund to achieve the lowest cost emissions reduction. Here we're looking at the example of power stations such as Hazelwood or Yallourn or Loy Yang or other ones, which, if there is a condition of no change in electricity prices and no jobs, could be converted on a lowest cost basis from coal to gas to clean up our emissions. That's on the table. Premier Brumby adopted our model. He's done that clearly and categorically, and the point here is, I think, extremely simple. We can clean things up. We will clean things up. We'll start on the 1st of July 2011. The government will start when the climate lotto is finished, but they do want to put a tax on electricity.
Penny Wong, your critique of Greg Hunt's policies.
Well, Kerry, Tony Abbott says he thinks climate change is absolute crap. He also thinks economics is boring. And what he has come up with is a policy that costs a lot and won't do anything about climate change. That's the reality. Now, the clear advice that we have made public from the same people who advised John Howard is that under Mr Abbott and Mr Hunt's policy, with the amount of money they've budgeted, we will see emissions in this country rise by 13% by 2020. Not a reduction, an increase. So it's this bizarre proposition where they pay polluters and Australia's pollution continues to rise. So they pay polluters, but our pollution continues to rise. And in fact, the true cost of Mr Abbott's policy, if he were to in fact achieve the 5% reduction, is around $27 billion of taxpayers' money being spent out to 2020. The reality is this is not a policy. This is a set of slogans from a man who neither likes economics nor believes that climate change is real.
With the time that's left, because it is the most substantial area for debate and difference, I would suggest, is the whole issue of establishing a price on carbon. Penny Wong, the Citizens' Assembly, when you say that you have a clear plan of action, you don't have a clear plan of action on an ETS, do you, if you're going to have to rely on a Citizens' Assembly to help you formulate what it's going to be and to sell it?
What we have to do, Kerry, but given what happened last year, is to rebuild a consensus for putting a limit on pollution. And let's just remember what occurred. Every party, every major party went to the last election with a commitment to putting a limit on pollution through a price on carbon. A number of people walked away from that. We tried to get it through, unfortunately, because Mr Hunt, Mr Turnbull and Mr Hunt couldn't deliver the Liberal Party. We could not get that through the Senate. Now, it's quite clear that we need a different approach. We need an approach where action on climate change is not subject to the internal politicking inside the Liberal Party room. We need action on climate change to be like Medicare is. Previously opposed by the opposition, as you know, Kerry, but now substantially supported across the Australian community such that it has multi-partite support. That's what we need on in terms of climate change. Now, the Citizens' Assembly is one of the ways we want to engage differently with the Australian community. But you know what's important here is this. Julia Gillard has said she will lead this debate. She has said, I, Julia, will lead this debate. I want to build the sort of consensus this type of reform needs. And the difference between Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott is not only that she understands and believes that climate change is real, but she also wants to bring the Australian people with her. Tony Abbott and Greg Hunt, as we've already seen in this interview, simply want to run a scare campaign around prices when we know electricity prices are also driven up by the uncertainty that their own actions have created.
OK. Greg Hunt, Tony Abbott has absolutely ruled out any market-based scheme to establish a price on carbon, at the very least until 2015. That's 5 years away, nearly 2 terms of government. 2015 sounds like such an arbitrary figure.
We will put in place a system of emissions reduction, and it is very different to the approach of the government. That is true. This is not a debate about science. It's a debate about 2 different systems. One is in the hands of 150 Australians randomly selected from the phone book, although I would ask the Senator, if they say we don't have a consensus, does that mean that your policy is held hostage?
Well, before you go on, let me just seek a quick yes or no to that. Penny Wong, does this Assembly in any way have the power to dictate policy?
Well, the Prime Minister's already addressed that in her speech. She said that they're not the final arbiter.
Okay.
But we back our ability to engage with the Australian people and the common sense of the Australian people on this issue. But I think the question that Mr Hunt is avoiding is, does his party want to put a limit on carbon pollution or not? Mr Hockey says it's inevitable.
I want to come back to
Mr Abbott says never ever.
Greg Hunt, sorry, continue. I just wanted to try and get that answer first.
That's right. So the answer is that the Citizens' Assembly is essentially a farce. But on the deep question that you ask, we will achieve our emissions reduction, but we will start immediately. We can give you a start date, the 1st of July 2011. We can give you a set of figures that we will work towards, the 140 million tonnes of reduction per annum by 2020. We can give you the expenditure in real terms, 300 million, 500 million, 750 million and $1 billion over the first 4 years of the program. Real action to do real things, such as directly cleaning up and converting from coal to gas some of the oldest and least efficient power stations subject to electricity pricing and jobs, such as cleaning up our soils, such as cleaning up waste coal mine gas and landfill gas. Real things with real emissions reductions. That's what we will do. The government wants an electricity price rise. That is the definition of what Senator Wong is seeking. The New South Wales regulator said it would add 20% over 3 years to the cost, and on the 3rd of February this year, then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd said it would add 19% over 2 years.
Now, very briefly, I'm going to ask each of you to summarise your position, and if you want to throw a stone at the other side in the process, that's your prerogative. Penny Wong.
Well, look, it's quite clear that Mr Abbott has no policy on climate change other than to take money from Australian taxpayers to pay it to polluters without any guarantee that that will in fact reduce emissions, and we know that it will in fact increase emissions. I noticed that Mr Hunt has not contradicted our assertion that his policy to get to 5% will cost $27 billion.
Contradict it now.
What is clear? What is clear? Well, what is clear? Well, then, if you reject it, Greg, are you going to put this through the Charter? The Charter of Budget Honesty, because we're still waiting for the opposition's policies to go through that process. And if you don't do it, we'll know it's because the figures are dodgy. The reality is the opposition have put forward a policy, the sort of policy you'd expect from someone who doesn't like economics and doesn't believe climate change is real. It's expensive, it takes from taxpayers to pay polluters, and it doesn't do anything for climate change.
Okay.
That's what Tony Abbott is offering the Australian people at this election.
Greg Hunt, your summary?
First point is that the incompetence continues. The tragedy and chaos of the Pink Bats program is being repeated in cash for clunkers at $400 per tonne. We will implement and put in place an environmental probity commissioner who is independent, and I would challenge Senator Wong to accept that mechanism on a bipartisan basis so as there is no more incompetence in program design or delivery, an independent environmental probity commissioner. The second thing is we will implement on the 1st of July 2011 a direct action fund, an emissions reduction fund.
You're going to submit your policy?
$2.5 billion.
Are you going to submit your policy to the Charter?
$2.5 billion. You've already assessed it.
Penny Wong, I'll put the question. Go on.
You've already assessed it and came out with dodgy figures which were debunked within 24 hours.
Sorry, Penny Wong.
A misuse of the public service, and you should be ashamed of that.
Just very quickly, Greg Hunt, she's asked a question. She answered one of yours earlier. Will you submit this part, your real action plan, as part of the Charter of Budget Honesty costing?
We have our costings are capped costings, so our costings cannot be in question. Our costings are
not
capped.
Your target.
So of course our costings.
Yeah, but not your target.
Will be submitted.
Not the 5%.
Greg Hunt, sorry, you've just got a few seconds now to finish.
Okay. The critical point here for Australians to remember, competence versus pink bats, direct action to reduce emissions versus a 20% increase in electricity prices.
Okay.
That's the choice.
And we're out of time, but thanks very much to both of you for hopefully shedding some light on the difference between the party policies. Greg Hunt, Penny Wong, thanks for talking with us.
Thank you.
Good to be with you.